So I just released my in-depth look at the new iPhone 15 Pros and how those compare to last year's 14 Pros. There were some surprising results. But I've been even more excited to make a video on the regular iPhone 15s because they get a far bigger upgrade over last year's phones in almost every area. We get cool design changes, big display improvements, surprising camera upgrades, and a nice performance boost too. There's a lot to go over. I've got a separate video comparing these 15s with the new Pro models. So if you're still deciding whether or not you need a Pro, you might want to check that video out. Here we're going to compare both the 15 and 15 Plus with last year's now discounted models, and the choice for which one you should upgrade to is really interesting this year. I'll start with my favourite upgrades, which are in the design. Despite having one fewer colour option, I think the range is a lot more attractive and diverse this year compared to last. It's a better lineup. Apple has found a new way of infusing colour into the glass to give these almost pastel-like finishes. The iPhone has been getting paler in colour for the past few years now, but I have to say that these finishes look really nice this year. Like the Pros, the 15s get the new contoured edges for a smoother, more comfortable feel in the hand, but the best change is the new matte texture for the back glass. I'm not joking when I say that this genuinely seems like a massive step up in the build quality, simply switching from that glossy surface to this new matte finish. I've been asking for this for years. It's the single biggest factor in making Apple's Pro iPhones feel more premium, and it elevates the 15s to a similarly high standard. Fingerprints are less of an issue, they don't get as oily, and they just feel a lot nicer in the hand. These are actually the best feeling iPhones ever, especially the smaller 15 with its comfortable compact size, and I'm including the Pros in that statement too. Comparing the dimensions and weight side by side, you'd be forgiven for expecting the same experience with the 14s, but the 15s look and feel decidedly more comfortable and premium. You're not really going to notice the size difference, but there is just enough of a change, especially with the camera bump, it's a hair larger, to force you into getting all new phone cases. The durability actually remains the same though. We still have an aluminium frame, ceramic shield glass, and an IP68 dust and water resistance. Something else that hasn't changed is the mute switch. Apple has deemed the new action button as a Pro-only feature, which I agree with, so this switch is the same as last year. You know what's the possibly boring but important change I'm most pleased about? Is the switch to USB-C. Some of you refuse to buy an iPhone out of principle purely because of the Lightning port, and you know what? Fair enough. There was no excuse for this when everyone else in the tech industry adopted the universal USB-C port. So thanks EU for forcing the world's richest company to play ball. We finally have USB-C on the iPhone. I've put out a YouTube short about the change and the new features this brings. It's not just Pro users who will benefit, so check that out if you're interested. Sadly, one of those is not faster charging. Despite the potential that USB-C unlocks, Apple is sticking with basically the same charging speeds we had before. They're not terrible, but this remains an area where Apple is playing catch-up to the competition. At least they've got MagSafe and all of the accessory possibilities this offers to make up for it. You do get a USB cable in the box, but what you don't get is a fast charger to actually charge the phone. Our friends at Ugreen have plenty of different options for this, and one I've had powering my home setup is this Nexode 5-port 300-watt fast charger. Of course, most of us these days are carrying 4 or 5 smartphones around, so this is very handy. Okay, just kidding, but you can see that whatever tech you have, whether it's phones, tablets, headphones, even laptops, this one device can charge your whole setup at once. And the biggest benefit here is that the huge 300-watt power output means you can charge them at full speed, even a 16-inch MacBook Pro, and you won't have to suffer from slow trickle charging. So if you've got a multi-device setup and want one device to solve your charging problems, this beast is definitely worth checking out. I'll leave it linked down below. To round off the design upgrade, Apple has slimmed down the bezel slightly. But more importantly, we finally say goodbye to the notch for good, as Apple brings Dynamic Island down to the regular iPhones this year. I'm aware that aesthetically this still divides opinion, but I personally am firmly in the camp of Dynamic Island offering a much more modern and visually appealing design. Let us know in the comments if you're in the other camp. You'd be forgiven for forgetting that this serves a functional purpose too. You really would be. It's honestly something I don't take nearly enough advantage of in my daily use. But seeing your notifications expand and contract out of this island is pretty cool. Certainly a lot more interesting and makes the phone feel a bit more fresh and new. Plus does a good job of disguising the intrusion on your display. So even if you don't end up using it often, you can still enjoy this as a visual improvement that allows us to keep Apple's Face ID, the most convenient unlock method on a smartphone, don't come for me. With that redesign comes a slimmed down speaker grille nestled into the top bezel. Fortunately, this doesn't result in any drop in the stereo separation or the speaker quality at all. The 15's tone might be slightly warmer, but honestly, in a blind test I'd struggle to tell the speakers apart. There's more of a display upgrade than just the new visuals. There's a huge brightness increase up to a peak of 2000 nits, making these two of the brightest smartphone displays on the market. This is going to make outdoor use in bright sunlight much easier, but even the typical brightness is up 200 nits for indoor use as well. But let's address the loud vocal minority who will now be screaming out about this phone not having a high refresh rate. No, it is 60Hz again this year. And I get it, this is the most expensive 60Hz smartphone on the market, and you'd hope the world's richest company might be a bit more generous. I'd also love to see ProMotion here, and as someone who's become used to high refresh rate phones, these screens do seem a bit choppy. There's no question about it. It's the one factor that makes the 15s difficult for me to ever switch to personally. The fact is though that Apple has a huge market of people who simply don't notice or care about having a high refresh rate. If you're not used to one, if you're upgrading from any non-Pro iPhone, then these displays are going to be great. They're super bright, sharp and colourful. What everyone is going to notice though is the increased brightness and dynamic island, so there are good display upgrades even if Apple is gatekeeping ProMotion for the Pro iPhones. I'm not defending Apple's decision, I just understand it. If you know you're getting a new 15, then all you've got to decide is if you want that smaller, more comfortable and easier to use 6.1-inch display, or if you want that bigger, more cinematic and easier to read 6.7-inch display in the 15 Plus. My advice? Get down to an Apple store and hold both in your hands. You'll make your mind up pretty quickly. This year we get an upgraded chipset in the A16 Bionic, the same processing power as in last year's 14 Pros. If you look at the benchmarks, you can see this translate into a small performance increase over the iPhone 14, both for the CPU and the graphics. I'm definitely happy to see an upgrade here, but it probably sounds better on paper than it really is. Realistically, these upgrades are fairly minor in terms of affecting your day-to-day use. I'm not sure anyone would really notice in a blind test. We have the same 6GB of RAM, games typically feel as though the frame rate is unchanged, and there's no noticeable boost for opening apps or load times. That's really not a bad thing at all. These phones are still incredibly fast, capable, and far beyond what the average iPhone buyer needs. The storage options are the same as well, starting at 128 and maxing out at 512. The 15s do get Apple's new 2nd gen ultra-wideband chip for improved precision finding. It's now able to connect with devices 3 times further away, which is a nice upgrade, and the location tracking features are actually really useful. Something I spotted in Apple's keynote was the advanced machine learning model to prioritize your voice on a phone call, so I went and tested this out.
So what you're hearing now is audio from a real phone call taken in a noisy environment on the iPhone 14. So apologies for the rough audio quality, but listen out for that background noise you can hear behind my voice as I'm speaking. It's isolating pretty well, but letting in some audible noise as well. And now you're hearing a phone call in exactly the same location, but on the iPhone 15. That background noise is much quieter. So Apple have indeed improved phone calls. And remember, this is a machine learning feature baked into the new phones by default. I'm not talking about the software call isolation feature, since that's available on older iPhones as well. There's an obvious improvement this year.
The A16 Bionic offers 20% more efficient high-performance cores, so does that result in better battery life? Well, Apple is quoting exactly the same numbers as last year's phones, but after some extensive testing with various scenarios, I was actually seeing slightly better battery on the new 15s. Here's an example of the battery levels after using the phones identically with mixed use, including video streaming, the camera, and some social media browsing. There is actually a small battery size increase with the 15s, so that could explain it, but I have found the battery to be a bit inconsistent with iOS 17 so far, so I'll have to see how the battery varies over time, and I wouldn't go in expecting any big improvement. For now though, I've been really pleased. The 15 Plus especially has fantastic nearly 2-day battery. And spoiler alert for the 15 versus 15 Pro video, these phones have been outlasting the Pros for battery life as well. I'm pleased to see the 15s get Apple's new 80% charging limit feature for long-term battery health. People who go for the base iPhone models tend to hang on to them for longer than Pro users, and if you plan on keeping the phone for a few years, then you might want to consider turning this on. 80% is plenty of juice for most people to see out an entire day, and capping the charging there will ensure you have a much healthier battery, and therefore a better performing phone in a few years' time. I also want to touch on the reported overheating issues on these phones. Apple has since acknowledged this as a software bug and even released an update to target this, and I have noticed the phones occasionally getting pretty warm, even after the update. I'm also getting exactly the same on the iPhone 14s though, which confirms to me this is a software issue. So I guess that's good in the sense that there's no inherent issue with the new phones, but Apple still has some work to do to fix these bugs. Let's get into people's favourite upgrade though, the cameras. The 15s get an all-new 48 megapixel main lens. It's similar in specs to last year's 14 Pro camera, but not actually the same lens. The ultra-wide and selfie lenses are the same as last year, but we've already seen from the Pro review how Apple's new processing this year has brought some significant camera improvements, including Smart HDR5 and the new Photonic engine. This 48 megapixel lens unlocks two powerful new features. The first is a 2x telephoto lens. This is achieved by cropping in on the big main sensor, and it effectively produces an optical zoom of 2x rather than having to zoom digitally and lose quality like the iPhone 14 does. Remember back when iPhones first became dual lens and got a 2x telephoto? Well, now you get one inside of your main camera lens. You don't need to stick a whole third camera lens on the phone, so you can keep the cleaner aesthetic of two lenses but actually have three at your disposal. The new lens means the 15s can zoom up to 10x instead of 5. The quality is kind of sketchy at this range as you'd expect, but it does mean that the quality of your zoom shots in general is now higher. For a phone with no dedicated zoom lens, the new 15s are doing a pretty great job. You'll see a quick toggle for that 2x option in the camera app, not just in the photo section, but also portrait mode. And generally portraits do look much better with a telephoto lens. They're not quite as sharp, but the portrait effect is usually better, and it's at least another option for you. The 15s are better at picking out finer details like hairs as well, even in this tricky low light shot. You can see how jarring the cutout is on the 14. The coolest upgrade though is not having to switch to portrait mode at all. If your subject is a person, dog or cat, the upgraded neural engine will capture that depth information automatically. So even if you took a normal photo, including selfies, you can simply tap to convert this into a portrait mode photo afterwards. It's very clever. But the more significant improvement, which we saw in the Pro iPhones as well, is Apple's new 24 megapixel output. The camera can now combine elements of a high-res image with another optimized for light capture to produce a 24 megapixel result, twice the resolution as on the iPhone 14 at a cost of only a small file size increase. It can be difficult to spot the improvement at first, especially on a small screen, but zooming in, you can see just how much more detail the 15 is able to capture now. This is a really significant upgrade, and it's all automatic. You don't have to get lost in any Pro menus or settings to enable this. Apple does give you a quick toggle for changing the picture format though, so whether you want to take photos like this, which I'd highly recommend, or instead use the full 48 megapixels, you've got those options. I think it's really interesting that Apple didn't bring this new 24 megapixel feature to last year's 14 Pros, despite having the same A16 Bionic chip. And it means this year's 15s actually have the better cameras. They also get the same processing tweaks as the Pros, so we now see slightly warmer, more saturated, and higher contrast photos. You'll often see a shallower depth of field because of the new larger sensors as well. You get a longer minimum focus distance now, but it can also create this really nice natural bokeh. But the best upgrade is definitely Smart HDR5. As we saw with the Pros, this does an excellent job of correcting overexposed highlights, which is something the 14 series really suffers from. These are now much more controlled. You can actually see the original detail in those areas, and the dynamic range improvement is possibly the most important camera upgrade this year altogether. The HDR is better even for night mode, and the new larger sensor also helps to bring a really nice low light improvement. We get sharper, cleaner details and less noise too. Actually capturing night mode shots is faster. This leads to less motion blur, so the results are sharper and less smeared. And once again, the greater zoom capacity extends to low light situations as well. The 15s aren't perfect. Here you can see the colours are a bit too warm and yellow, whilst on the left they're perhaps a bit too cool and blue. Zooming in though, you can see quite a significant increase in the resolution and even the details in the background of photos. So the iPhone 15 brings some really great low light improvements. I think my only disappointment with low light comes with video. The 15s just seem to brighten up nighttime video a bit too much. The 14s did a better job of capturing a realistic image. It's closer to what I saw in real life. The quality is still really good, but I hope Apple will update the processing to match the older style instead. As for the daytime video, I didn't see as much of a difference as I expected. The quality was extremely similar across the 4 phones, but I'm personally absolutely fine with that since the quality on the 14 was already extremely good. And finally, selfies do get an upgrade with much better exposure control. The 15s don't over-brighten selfies as much, so you get a much more realistic image with natural colours and actually better details as well. We also see this in portrait mode, but I want to draw your attention to the improvement in the portrait detection this year. You can see it even more clearly in these selfie portraits. Just look at how the 15 is able to capture even very fine hairs at the edges and keep those in focus. It's an impressive improvement. So this is how the selfie video compares on the 14 and 15. There's not a huge difference because we do have the same selfie lens, but I just saw a little bit more saturation and contrast on the 15 thanks to the new processor. On the whole, this is actually a really significant camera upgrade this year all round. Images are more detailed, have far better HDR, the zoom is now improved, as is night mode. Those of you for whom the camera is very important will likely want to splash out on one of this year's phones. And doing so will set you back $799 for the iPhone 15 or $899 for the bigger 15 Plus. This is thankfully the same pricing as last year, unless of course you live somewhere like the UK where the phones are actually cheaper this year than last. It's very rare for prices to come down, and they were creeping worryingly close to the Pros, so this is really nice to see. I'm honestly so impressed with the 15s this year. They look and feel so much more premium, they get a Pro chipset and camera upgrades, brighter displays, slightly better battery. It's pretty substantial. Apple still sells the iPhone 14 and even the 13 though. They're now discounted, so there is a question to be asked about which phone is the best to go for. Last year, the 14 was absolutely not worth getting over the 13. That was the smallest upgrade ever for the iPhone, so I personally think you can ignore the 14. It's just awkwardly stuck in the middle, offering neither the cheap price of the 13 nor the cool upgrades of the 15. This year, we get one of the biggest upgrades ever. So the question really is between the new 15 and the $200 cheaper iPhone 13. With the vast number of upgrades on offer here, the future-proofing with USB-C that protects even the most upgrade-averse iPhone users, I think it's worth spending extra on the 15. In fact, even if you upgrade fairly often, it's worth it. That's how good the upgrades are this year. The 13 exists now for those people on a tighter budget, or those that are just not tech-savvy in the slightest, those who wouldn't notice or care for the new upgrades, but needs a new, easy-to-use smartphone. If you're weighing up the 15 and 15 Plus, it should be a relatively simple choice. It's the same phone in 2 sizes, the only differences come with how big these feel in your hands, the screen size, and the battery life. The 15's battery is plenty for most people, so it's really those first 2 things that are the most important, especially with how they feel to hold and use. I personally like the compact form factor of the regular iPhone 15, but if battery life is a concern to you, the 15 Plus is an absolute beast. I think it's interesting that Apple is still selling the Plus. It didn't seem to sell very well last year, despite calls for a cheaper, big-screen iPhone, so let me know which one you're going for this year. A lot of people might have held on to their phones last year, but I reckon there's enough on offer here to tempt many into upgrading. If you're stuck deciding between an iPhone 15 or a Pro, I've got a video either on the channel right now, or if not, then coming very soon. So subscribe and hit the notification bell so you get notified when all the new videos go live. If you found this one helpful, then please give it a like because that really helps out. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you all in the next one.